don't like your name, you can just change it. If you don't like your job, you can just leave it. 'Cause if you don't like your life, you don't have to believe it.
Hello and welcome back to Raise a Glass, the podcast where we talk about the stories and storytellers that shape us. My name is Eric Lintola.
And I am Hunter Danson.
And for you listeners, it might not have been very long since you last heard our voices. But for us, it has been months, right, Hunter?
Yeah. I'm really bad at keeping track of time like that, but it's been a good month or so.
Yeah,
over a month.
And as strangely as it would be, we chose a 2-part episode to start before the break.
Yeah.
And to work on after.
Yeah.
But with that said, I'm very excited for our discussion today. But before we get into it, let's start off with what's in your glass, Hunter.
Well, I still have some shui left over from last month, which is hot water. Because in China they generally drink hot water. But I also, I went and got an IPA. Aldi's Nomad IPA for all the adventurers.
Like one word, nomad, or like you're not allowed to be mad?
It's called the Hopping Nomad IPA. Okay. So like a nomad, like an adventurer. It's decent. It's Aldi.
Aldi does a pretty good job
IPA.
Of having local stuff. There's this at Aldi in Rochester. There's some local Rochester beers there. So
nice.
I don't know if the Hopping Nomad is also local to your area.
It is not local.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, for me, I have a glass of milk, I think 2%, to wash down one of my favorite, I think everybody's childhood favorite snacks that we had lying around, some worms and dirt.
All right. Wow. Yeah.
The Oreos have been in the fridge for a little bit, so they're not really crunchy anymore, but they still taste delicious. Oh my goodness, Hunter. It is so easy to make chocolate pudding. You get a pudding pack and you put 2 cups of milk, and you whisk them for 4 minutes. And you have chocolate pudding.
That is easy as it gets.
Yep. And it is more than decent. It's like my internal piece was like, oh, how can I make, chocolate pudding? And I was like, you know what? Why don't I just go the simple route?
All right. Well, are you raising your dirt pudding or pouring it out for anything this week?
Yes. So I am going to, I'll start with pouring one out. I'm going to pour one out for the number of sicknesses that kids get. My son just turned 1. That is a hint to my raising a glass. But between him and all my nephews, and somebody's always sick. Yeah. And I know it's going to get more before it gets less. So
yeah,
pouring one out for that. But I am raising a glass to my son, to Caleb. He just turned 1 this week, and I can't believe it. I also can't remember life before him. I've been told that's God. Like, 'cause if you could remember things beforehand, like in what life was like, or you could remember the first 2 months of, having the baby, you might not want more. But God gives us the ability to forget. And it's just so much fun to see him. Yeah. He's walking around. He got blown over by the wind yesterday, and today I was like, "Oh, can you give me a hug?" And he walked right up to me, gave me a hug. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So I'm just raising a glass to Caleb, and that's where the worms
great.
and dirt come in. That was one of the 2 different desserts we made for his birthday party.
Oh, wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Hunter, how about you? What are you raising a glass and pouring one out for this week?
I am raising a glass to Michaela Schifrin, who now holds the record for the most World Cup wins of all time. She surpassed Ingemar Stenmark, who held the record for over 30 years. And I think to do it in this day and age of ski racing with, the level of technology and preparation and work that goes into like national teams at the World Cup level, to be that consistent now at that level is all the more impressive. And not to diminish anything from Stenmark, he's a legend for a reason. But it's a different era of ski racing, and she's like around our age. She's like a year or 2 younger, I think, and so it's been cool to kind of watch her career. As I was ski racing and growing up, she was ski racing and growing up, and but much faster than I was. So, and she also did this like YouTube series that's kind of like a documentary following this season. And she is very humble and has embraced failure, and
wow,
which you don't often see at the top level of sports. If those of you who remember the Olympics, I don't think she medaled in anything, and she fell like 3 times.
She had a rough Olympics.
Yes, and so she really embraced that. And honestly, like this season has on the World Cup circuit has been like one of her best. She won the overall Globe. She won the GS final. She passed the all-time record. So just
small things.
Yeah, but it's kind of sad because a lot of Americans, all they see is the Olympics, and that's just like 3 races out of hundreds.
On 3 races on one type of snow and ice and mountain too. It's not even like 3 random races. Yeah.
So I'd definitely recommend watching the series she shares about, dealing with the loss of her dad and dealing with failure and embracing every moment of the sport. Because, she said that she doesn't just do it. If she only did it for the wins, then she probably wouldn't be ski racing. And yes, but I'm pouring one out for something that's maybe even more niche and a little nerdy is Solus operating system, which is a distribution of Linux. So those of you who are wondering, there's Windows, there's Mac, and then there's Linux, which is the operating system that runs on the hardware of your computer. They had kind of a snafu with the development servers, and the project has really been languishing. It hasn't been able to get updates. So like it still works, but they haven't been able to get the newest security updates for like a month. So now I'm on Ultramarine, which is a fork of Fedora for any fellow nerds out there who care. But it's just kind of sad because I've been using it for a long time, and you kind of get to know people in the Linux forums. But I'm still, I'm wishing the best to the developers who really work in their spare time and do a lot, and hope this situation gets better.
I'm sorry. I take this very seriously.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, if you don't know anything about it, it's just going to sound like gibberish. But, I've been thinking about the podcast, and I feel like I was starting to take it a little too seriously. Big surprise. if any of you know me. So I'm just trying to, this is
Be you. Yeah.
this is not my most polished work. I'll say that. But that's kind of the point. That's what a podcast is. It's a different kind of thing. But
It's true. It's true. I appreciate you, Hunter, even though I don't understand you often, and the words that come out of your mouth sometimes are Mandarin, and sometimes they just sound like Mandarin to me.
yeah,
And yes, is the thing called Solus, or are you calling it Solus?
it's called Solus, Solus, the Solus Project.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I heard soulless,
Yeah,
like without a soul.
no,
And I was like, well, it seems like that's an indictment from you. But no,
No,
okay. It's called Solus.
it was really a
like
great,
the sun.
yeah,
Like solar.
yeah, like Solus, Solus.
So the idea was there, but the reality of it hasn't come through.
Well, it has been running for like years and years and years. I've run it for like 6 years. What has happened is the main server where people get updates for the operating system, like if you need to update your browser or something, in Linux, you run a command and it updates it for you, everything. But the dev servers went down, and the only person who has access to the servers who can fix them, because she has to be there physically on site to fix it, had some like health issues and personal things, and there was like a snowstorm, and there just haven't been any updates for a while.
Wow.
And everyone wants to work on it, but there's only like one person who can actually be there and has access to the servers, who can get it. Once the servers
This
are up,
sounds like
then
doomsday-esque.
it's really been pretty bad for the operating system. I mean, it's an open source project, so it's not like people are like losing money. It's not a company. It's just kind of sad to see like a project that I really loved, that I used a lot, to have it kind of hit a pretty rough patch.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing, Hunter. And for those of you listeners who this strikes home with, feel free to send them a message
yeah,
of support and solidarity. And maybe we'll get that soulless thing back up. Soulless.
yes, make the soul Luket again.
Yeah, all I could think of was the Pixar movie Soul,
Right.
which is really good. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The score, the soundtrack in that is amazing. Actually, not, not at all similar, but I'm going to attempt to segue here.
Okay.
But the soundtrack in Soul is incredible. Not too dissimilar, in fact, it's very different. But there's also a great soundtrack in To Live. How about that? Did I do a good job?
Yes. All right.
You know
It's
Matt,
fine.
right? Okay, great. Hunter, I am really excited to talk about To Live, the movie, because in our last episode, you talked about being introduced to the movie prior to the book, and the way that impacted you. And you actually went back and rewatched the movie because you were introduced to it in Mandarin with the English subtitles, and you've been working on now reading To Live in Mandarin, as well as having read it in English. And I had made the decision, because you had started with the movie, to start with a book. And I made that decision maybe months ago, feels like at this time. And having watched the movie now, I understand why you liked it and wanted to read the book.
Yay.
Because the tone is completely different. I found that to be just a huge difference. At least when I was reading through To Live, I just felt bleak and bleak and bleak and bleaker and bleaker. And at the end, somebody saying, yeah, but I'm still alive. So it's not as bleak as it could be. And like, that was my reading. That is it, without having seen the movie, without knowing anything about it. I don't think somebody could watch this movie and come away with that opinion, because there is such part of it is the soundtrack. The soundtrack sets up a tone that, in the midst of pain, in the midst of death, in the midst of sorrow and loss, there is still continuity. There is still not just life that goes on, but life that is worth living.
Yeah. I guess to give a little context, we're sort of jumping in, but the novel To Live and the movie are set just before the Communist Nationalist War for China, and it follows a guy named Fu Gui and his family as they try to live through that war and the Cultural Revolution and after. And I'm glad that you enjoyed the movie. I was very excited for you to watch the movie because it is lighter. There are more comedy moments. The actor who plays Fu Gui was actually a comedy actor.
He is amazing.
Yeah,
I actually really appreciated all of the acting in this movie, but I really liked him.
Yeah, and Jiao Zhen is amazing. Who plays his wife, or who is his wife, played by Gong Li. And I understand your reaction to the book. Because the book is, well, I just want to, maybe we can just say a couple things briefly about the book, and then we'll go into the movie, because we talked a lot about the book last time. I read, in our time off, a book called Lily Briscoe's Chinese Eyes, which is a study of... To
the Lighthouse.
Well, it's not To the Lighthouse. It takes its title from the character Lily Briscoe from To the Lighthouse, and which we opened season 2 with. But it talks about how Lily Briscoe got her Chinese eyes, because Virginia Woolf describes her as having Chinese eyes. And it turns out that Virginia Woolf's nephew had a professorship in China. And there was this literary group in China called the Crescent Moon Group that had ties to the literary group that Virginia Woolf was a part of, which was the Bloomsbury group. And her nephew ended up having an affair with a Chinese writer-painter named Ling Shuhua. And so there was a lot of interplay between these British writers and these Chinese writers and artists. And so that's kind of like, it was a really fascinating read, just because it was so cool to see how, because a lot of the literature before was about how Western art has influenced Chinese art. And this was more about how Chinese art has influenced Western art, through this lens of British modernism stuff. But one of the things that I wanted to share from that book is it is frequently brought up. One of the characteristics of Chinese art is how much is left out. It's like if you look at traditional Chinese paintings, they're very sparse. A lot of times it's just in ink, so it's black and white. It's just ink on paper. Very few lines, and often, calligraphy isn't considered just writing. Calligraphy is considered painting. So writing in like characters and words are combined with painting in Chinese art. And I think specifically the part that applies to live is how much is left out, because it's a short book. And Yu Hua doesn't give too much commentary, really, about what's going on. He doesn't really give his perspective. He just tells it through Fu Gui. And I think that reading it a second time, when you look between the lines of the book, you can see a lot. And the second time I read it, I came away with like the opposite feeling that you had, where that kind of hopeless feeling. But this is, and the large part of that is because I think the book, the Cultural Revolution was horrible, I think it's really hard for us to kind of grasp the scale of like the suffering of what happened. Just like millions of people just starving, and we know we're taught about the Holocaust a lot, and we're taught we do cover the Cultural Revolution. At least we did in high school, in my school. But like, it's one thing to just kind of read about it in a textbook. But it's really impossible to underestimate the impact of that on the Chinese people. And Yu Hua, rather than avoiding it or, just writing about something else, he looks in the face of all of that suffering, because millions and millions of families went through what Fu Gui went through. And he looks all of that in the face, and he says, you don't win. Life goes on, and there's beauty in that life. Which I think that the movie more effectively conveys, and maybe that's because it's more something that we're used to, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think about that, because that's what you just shared is beautiful, and I think I shared this in our last conversation, that I'm not used to reading this type of literature. I'm not used to reading literature that was originally written in Chinese,
Right.
and in the type of cultural piece, and so I'm sure my reading of it could be very different than what was meant to be conveyed. And with film, though, I am used to watching more films in more places.
Right.
And I'm very attuned to music and the way that music can make you feel and think differently. And so I guess it makes sense to me that.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a very long tangent I went on, but I don't know. Obviously it's something I'm biased about, but I want to hear more about your reaction to the movie. Trying to think of a good question to get us going.
My cat just jumped on my lap. Lewis is not that type of cat usually. Very excited.
How did you feel about Fu Gui this time around versus the book?
I think reading the book first gave me an understanding of Fu Gui's story arc. And so even from the beginning, when it opens up in a gambling hall, I was not necessarily opposed to him, because I know the type of person he ends up becoming. And so I think that helped a lot. And I very much felt the relationships that Fukui is in. So one of the things I think movies are often forced to do more so than books is to show, not tell. So the book's told by Fukui, well, by a narrator after talking with Fukui, who's narrating his life. And so a lot of it is like what happened to me versus the movie. It's what is actively happening in his life.
Right.
And I think I felt that difference. And it makes sense to me when you said the Fukui, the actor, is played by a comedian, because there was a decision made in the movie to give Fukui longer after he wins the house and everything. That's Fukui goes to him some amount of time later and says, "Hey, will you give me a loan so I can start up a small business?" And Longer says, "No, I'm not going to give you a loan, but I will give you, let you borrow my puppets,
Shadow puppets.
shadow puppets set, so you can make your own money." He said, "Even when I had no money, I could make money with this and didn't have to beg." And so there's that theme of the shadow puppets and of the box they come in that has little metal bits on it that follows with Fukui in the entire story. And it's beautiful. And it follows through the deaths of, it's after the death of his father, but follows through in the death of his mother and of his kids, and to be assumed the death of his wife. And if we know the full book, the death of everybody else. And it gives, for me, like it gave a really like strong visual and a strong like knot, KONOT, that was like tied to Fukui, that almost made him stand out. Right, he stood out because he was bald. He had purposed his shape, so you could always visually tell who he was. But then he also stood out as the person with the shadow puppets, and his job was to give people joy when all was lost. And so that is how he came across to me once he kicked his gambling habit, as one who's there to give joy. And even before then, right? The time
for him.
Yeah. Like even while he was still, before he lost all of his money, he went and was telling some shadow puppet stories in the gambling hall.
Yeah, I absolutely loved the shadow puppets. I was actually surprised when I went to read the book and it wasn't in the book. But it makes so much sense, like for a movie. And because they're just so fascinating to watch. And they have really, really great performances by Fukui and the other shadow puppet troupe. Because basically to make his living after he gambles away all his money, he starts a shadow puppet troupe and they travel all over. And there's a lot of great montages of the shadow puppet acts and stories, and you can see them playing traditional instruments and the way that they sing. It's like it doesn't sound like blues, but it really hits me in the same way that blues does, in that it is, a expression of grief and yet also joy, and carries great sadness, can carry great happiness, and it comes from a place of deep suffering and cultural history. And it's beautiful. And there's also a lot of symbolism with the box that the shadow puppets are carried in. The chest.
Hunter, I think a question that our listeners might be asking, it's a question that if I hadn't read and watched it and heard a little bit of information about it, I would be asking as well. But it's a question you are equipped to answer. And the question is, how much of a role, if any, did the author have in the movie? Because one of the things, as we are living in an age of remakes, is often authors are given different types of voices, sometimes none, sometimes a lot. And we can see that sometimes the finished product sways pretty significantly from the heart of the original piece. And we've talked about this movie being carrying a tone that might have actually be true to what the book was communicating. I just missed it. And you said that you've read that. So I know that they were actually completed within just a few years of each other, like not too differently in time. Can you tell us a little bit more about that interaction?
Yeah. So I believe Zhang Yimou was planning on doing an adaptation of one of Yu Hua's works. And originally he was going to do a thriller or something. But then Zhang Yimou, who's the director, he picked up To Live, and he read it in one night. And so when he met with Yu Hua, they're like, maybe we should just do To Live. And they ended up doing that one. And I'm pretty sure, isn't there a writing credit for Yu Hua on the movie?
Is there? It was in Mandarin.
Okay.
I can write it.
Right. Yeah, there might be, but I'm pretty sure he had like a pretty big role. This is from my afterword from To Live. That says the script was adapted by the author in collaboration with Zhang Yimou and the screenwriter Liu Wei. So it was adapted by the author. So I guess he had a pretty big hand in it.
And it's clear there's not additional characters. It very much follows the story arcs and the characters of the book To Live, while making some really, I think, understandable changes. The pace in the movie is very fast, and they are really good at showing how time has changed in pictures, in ages of kids, in small, like if you blink, you might miss it. Like, oh, we've skipped forward 3 years, or 4 years. I think it does it really well.
Yeah.
Hunter, is there a specific character that sticks out to you I'm thinking in terms of the film, but I would be interested for a brief moment of whether or not that is the same character that sticks out to you in the book.
Besides Fugui, I think that Jiao Zhen really steals the show in the movie. Like they definitely expand her role, because it's not told from the perspective of Fugui in the movie, and the performance by Gong Li is really, really fantastic. Like just the one shot when you see Jiao Zhen after Fugui comes back from the war, and you see Jiao Zhen with Feng Xia and Yo Qing. like the first time you see her with she's delivering water is really, I remember that scene like from the first time I watched it. I remember that scene years later, just because she has Yo-Ching on her back and she's like filling up the water, and
it's before sunrise, or it's just at sunrise.
Yeah, it's like it is the way it's framed and the lighting and everything. It's just like you just feel her strength.
She is a powerhouse. Yeah. She is the strength in their family.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I also really enjoyed Chun Chung. He, I think he might have been a comedy actor too, because the scenes with him and Fugui and Old Chuan, despite being in like a really, really awful wartime situation,
terrible.
There's a lot of comedy in it, like. And you almost can't help but laugh, like
this must have been an officer's coat. You got this is real booze.
Yeah, right. And they're like going. He finds a coat for them, and he's going to put on the coat, and he's like, "There's blood on this," and he's like, "Don't really have a choice." But yeah, how about you?
I really connected with Urshi, and you've already shown me the correct way to pronounce his name. But the man who marries Feng Xia,
yeah,
and joins the family. I thought he played. I mean, I think they all played their characters to the book incredibly well, but I really. He was a breath of fresh air to me in the book and in the movie, because I feel like in a lot of the literature that I read and movies I watch, when there's a man that marries a woman who they don't really know each other well, like it is 9 times out of 10 a bad thing, like ultimately, and people husbands taking advantage of wives, and that is just not this character at all. Like I just love the first time he shows up their house, he's crippled, but it's not because he's got a birth defect. It's because he got injured in a work thing. he just sits there and he says, "Good." And it says, good. And Feng Shui walks out and he sees her. And then he says, "Okay, goodbye." And then he shows up the next day or some few days later when the mother and father are at the, I don't know, getting thread or getting something to make a dress, or I don't even know what they're getting. And him and his friends like rip down all the ceiling tiles and like redo the house. And then there's like 3 like huge murals of Chairman Mao painted everywhere. That because he's a great artist. And and then like the whole wedding scene. I really appreciate the levity and the passion that a character who is not defined by being passionate that he brings. Like it's just. And he immediately calls him mom and dad, and
right.
And there's just so much life that I feel like that brings to what at that point was a very dark moment in the movie, and in their whole family.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Like in the book and the movie, Archie is the man. I think. Speaking of the scene where they find them painting the picture of Chairman Mao together, and that's like I think that's one of the scenes where like he actually likes Feng Xia and they're going to get married. How do you feel? This character is not in the book directly, but he overshadows the book, or at least is kind of a backdrop. How do you feel about Mao Zedong?
Well, I am glad you're not asking me this during the peak of the Cold War.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think this is an American telling of this movie of this American movie of this book would be much more of an indictment and a speakment against Mao Zedong, and I think that's pretty. I read that in the movie.
Oh yeah, it was banned when it came out in China.
Okay, like we have to do what we have to do to survive. Long burns down the house that used to be Fugue's, and like he hears about that, and he says, "Well," and like the village leader is like, "Oh, those are some strong. Your house is made out of some strong counter-revolutionary timbers." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Whose house?" or something like that. He's like, and so he like immediately kind of jumps on the bandwagon. Like he did one puppet show for. Well, he was working for the anti-revolutionary. Military, but then did one puppet show after becoming a POW for the Liberation Army, and then got a little note saying that, and so then the rest of the movie, they're very quick to say, "Oh, he was in the Liberation Army," like right. That's
and he puts his certificate. He gets a certificate from the Liberation Army, which are the communists. Saying that he served in the Liberation Army, and he puts it through the wash accidentally, mm-hmm. and Jiajian like goes and fishes it out, and they end up framing it.
Oh, and that's when Archie looks at. That's what he looks at. And says, "Oh, good."
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. One of my biggest memories from AP World History, I had a great teacher, but it's been a few years. So there are very many things I don't remember, but he taught us a way to remember all of the dynasties of China using a common song that we all know that has stuck in my head all these years, which will indicate to you the knowledge that has retained in my head about Mao Zedong. Here it goes. Shang Zhou Qin Han, Sui Tang Song, Yuan Mingqing Republic, Mao Zedong. He kills people. Mao Zedong. He kills people. And that's what I remember about Chinese history. I don't know if I should be embarrassed or what, but I appreciated the statements about them trying to take over Taiwan as well, because I found that funny. But I also know that's a very politically charged conversation today. And there are a lot of undercurrents that I recognized were undercurrents, but I didn't understand because of my lack of knowledge and interaction with China. So
yeah,
that's kind of where I was at, and it was very clear that even anybody in a position of authority, even if they continually were pro-communist, became a capitalist dissenter within this movie. And whenever that happened, what was the job of everybody else? To distance themselves from that person.
Yeah. To survive.
Yeah. To live.
Yeah. At the moment when Fugui realizes, like, he gambles away all of his property, and Long R takes over his property, and then Long R is executed as a landowner, and Fugui realizes that if he hadn't gambled away his property, it probably would have been him executed.
What if Long R hadn't cheated him out of all of the things?
Right.
Really, in the books, like, he was using loaded dice.
Right. Yeah. It's true. I guess getting to how it's shaped me. I asked that question about Mao because after I came back from China, I had some views about Mao, and if you had asked me about them, I would have told them to you. I'm realizing now that I can trace a lot of that back to this movie, because Mao and the movement, Great Leap Forward and everything, basically killed people for no reason. Like, they smelt all of the pots that people used to cook rice.
To make 3 cannonballs.
Yeah, to make 3 cannonballs that, the team leader says it's like one we're going to drop it right on Chiang Kai-shek's bed. Or something.
Another one on his dining room table. Third's on his toilet. Right. So he can't sleep, eat, or poop.
Yeah, and it's this spirit of, like, improvement, of like, wanting to surpass America and prove that China is a strong nation, a capable nation. I think I'm far from an expert, but that's kind of the sense that I get from what I've read and seen about the Cultural Revolution and Great Leap Forward and all of that. But there's just so many senseless things that are done. Going back to the smelting of the pots, they smelt all the pots, and they're like, Fugui's like, well, what are we going to cook with? They're like, all right, you can go to the common dining hall anytime you want to get food. And it's great for like a few months. And then they start running out of food, and they don't have any pots to cook rice in. And they keep waiting to get rice from the team leader, like, goes every week or something to try and get rice at the worst of the famine. And it just never comes. It keeps getting promised and it never comes. And a lot of that's in the book.
It's skipped over in the movie.
Yeah. But I think, like, the biggest thing in the movie is, at least for me, is Feng Xiao's death. Were you thinking of something else, or?
Oh, I was thinking about the chicken becomes a goose, becomes a sheep, lamb becomes a sheep. But
yeah,
I was understanding your movement in a different way. So, but yes, let's talk about Feng Xiao's death. I think I don't think we can talk about this without talking about that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, which death hit you the hardest in the book versus which hit you the hardest in the movie?
So I think it's really hard to watch this movie and not have Feng Xiao's death be the one that hits you hardest, because there's so much blood, and that is its own huge scene. I just actually skipped through it because it was too much for me, and it had to do with it just like and the way they told it was like pretty much all the doctors in training staged a revolt and kicked out all of the actual doctors because they were, I can't remember the specific language.
Bourgeoisie, they're holding China back, counter-revolutionary.
And the whole reason, and because of that, then Feng Shui dies. And so do all those doctors.
Yeah,
And
because basically the trained doctors are in prison and being publicly humiliated, and the nurses' aides or like the students, medical students, are taking over as doctors, and they don't know how to deal with Feng Xia. She has that there's a name for it. She has hemorrhaging after giving birth, and they don't know how to stop it. And do you know, guys?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that could not be the most impactful death in somebody in watching this movie, even though it's by no means the only death.
Right.
Just by sheer amount of screen time and vocalization. Like, we don't see Yo Ching's death. We just see his hand. I think it's hard for me. I think his death in the book, though, was the one that hit me the hardest, Yo Ching's. Because it was completely useless, needless, and infuriating.
Yeah.
And as out of left field as it was in the movie, but in a completely different way. In both cases, it's the person who's most directly caused, who most directly causes his death. In both cases, is Chun Chung. Chun Chung.
Yeah.
And in the movie, he accidentally backs up to a wall and it collapses on Yo Ching in a Jeep. And he also gets injured, and that's. But in the book, Yo Ching dies because he's the best runner, and his dad pushed to the side. But it's because he has the same blood type as Chung Chung's wife.
Yeah.
And the stupid doctor in the clinic dries him of all his blood.
Yeah.
And it's just, I hated it. And then, I mean, but then it's also hard to think Little Bun's death is just so sad.
Right.
They all are. Everyone is sadder than the next, but Yo Ching's is the one that hits me the most in the book.
I had a similar reaction. Like, it was definitely Yo Ching's death in the book, and Feng Xia's in the movie. I wanted to share one bit from the book, and it's about Yo Ching's death. Because I think it captures. I'm just going to read it. When we got to Yo Ching's grave, Jiajian wanted me to put her down. With tears streaming down her face, she climbed atop Yo Ching's burial mound. She placed both her hands upon the earth above his graves, as if she wanted to caress Yo Ching, but she had so little energy that all she could do was move a few fingers. Seeing Jiajian like this, my heart hurt so much it felt like it was all blocked up. I really shouldn't have buried Yo Ching. I should have let Jiajian see him one last time. Jiajian stayed there until dark. I was afraid the night dew would make her sick, so I picked her up and put her on my back. Jiajian had me take her over to the edge of the village. By the time we got there, my collar was soaked. Yo Ching won't be able to run down this trail to school anymore, Jiajian said, crying. I gazed at that narrow, twisting trail that led to town and heard the sound of my son running barefoot. The moonlight was shining on the trail, giving the illusion that a layer of salt had been sprinkled along it.
This is not an uplifting book or movie in the reality, because it tells the stories. And while maybe the ultimate point could be uplifting, it doesn't shy away from talking about pain. And when you think you're through it, it brings up another one. And so many of them hit you from left field or right field. You don't see them coming. And you can't become callous to them because they're so unexpected. And none of the deaths make sense.
Hence my my feeling towards Mao and the whole movement. I don't know. It's. I mean, obviously, I have had a lot of love for China, but not the government. China to me is the Chinese people, and this is both the movie and the book focuses on the people and what they've been through. And there's so much more to tell. Like I'm, just one person who studied abroad in China. There's so many other stories to read and learn and see.
Mm-hmm. And I would say for all of those out there who are interested in this, I think the right way to go about this particular story, maybe from a Western perspective, is to start with the movie. And I, as a person, hate saying that because that is not how I live my life with most books and movies.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's the right move.
Because the movie is, Zhang Yimou is a modern director, and his techniques, I think, are familiar. His film language is familiar to a Western audience. He did the movie Hero as well, which was more famous in the West. And he's done a lot of other films too.
Any parting words for us?
I don't know. I had like a few sentences I wanted to try to read in Chinese from the book. 赏心悦目的女孩，她黝黑的脸，但至今还在我眼前内内发光。我见到她时，她卷起裤管，坐在河边的青草上，摆弄着一根竹竿，在照看一群肥硕的鸭子。
Can you read that in English? Do you know what it is in English? Or like where it is?
More or less. Yeah. Well, there was one phrase here that, and I think, okay, maybe I could pull it together and end with this. The reason that I highlighted these three sentences, not necessarily a particular story reason. This is early on. This is from the narrator's perspective, when he's just going about the countryside, and he meets a young girl and decides that he almost decides that he wants to marry her, and then he sees her three brothers coming up, and he runs away.
Yep.
But I highlighted one phrase, which is 坐在河边的青草上. And this is what I mean by when you look between the lines, there is great beauty in it. And a lot of that, when you consider the tradition of writing in characters and in a language that is visual, incredibly visual, and a language that blends painting and language in its art. The beauty most often I find in the book is in the imagery. And this is imagery. It's zai, which is at, he, which is a river. Hebian is riverside. De is a possessive article, which just, it's basically like the rivers, like adding apostrophe S, basically. The Qingzao Shang. Qingzao is like early morning. It's like a fresh, bright morning. So it's kind of like saying sitting by the river's fresh, bright morning, which doesn't make much sense in English, but it works in Chinese. And it's so simple and so elegant and so effective. Like you're sitting by the river's fresh early morning. And it's just in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in like 7 characters, I am sitting by a fresh, clean riverside. The sun is out, but it's cool. There's dew. And the river is running. And it's beautiful. And that is in the midst of all that is going on with Fugui and the death and everything else. And that's why I love it.
Thank you, Hunter. Thank you for bringing this to our conversation and for continually encouraging me to watch the movie, even when I was reticent to do so after reading the book. It definitely helped change my perspective. And you have an uncanny ability to find wonderful literature and to encourage me to take part in it, even when I am more reticent to do so.
So thank you for being willing. I know it's not easy to make time, to engage with it, to experience it, to feel it. So thank you for that. And this is one that I found by myself. I will take credit for finding this literature by myself, but a lot of the other ones are from my wife. She has impeccable taste. She found To the Lighthouse. I read To the Lighthouse because of her. So, thank you, Kim.
Go, Kim.
Thank you, listeners, for listening to us. I hope it's a good time. I hope you got something out of it. To live.
And if you are out there listening and want to send a piece of literature our way to read, to watch, to listen to talk about, if you have either of our personal information, feel free to send us a message. If not, is there a way that people can get in contact with us?
Yeah, I am on Twitter at hdanson. I don't like Twitter, but I have one. I'm also on Mastodon, so mastodon.social at hdanson. At hdanson at mastodon.social. So you can go on there. I also link my website to the podcast, and that has other contact info, including Patreon if you want to buy us a glass or something, or not. Whatever. It's Yeah. But thanks for listening.
Yeah, we've got some
Tai
other
chi.
great episodes coming your way later this season.
Yes,
that
yes, we're
I
gonna.
am very excited about.
I am too. Yeah. Hadestown, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Why do we build the wall? My children, my children. Why do we build the wall? Why do we build the wall? We build the wall to keep us free. That's why we build the wall. We build the wall to keep us free.
Short preview. Our very own.
Gives me chills. That song has been stuck in my head since I saw it 3 weeks ago.
Written before 2016.
2006, actually, that was written.
Yeah.
But insane. Insane. I could spend an entire podcast episode just talking about that song. So that and along with many more.
Yes.
Good night.
Signing off. Cheers.
Follow me down this road. We won't get lost 'cause I know